Well, hello and welcome. This is video 4 of a 5-part series on the Renaissance, and today's video is going to focus on Renaissance writing. And what I'll talk through today are just some of the characteristics or characteristics of Renaissance writing and how writing was changing compared to the time before, and then also highlight a couple of authors. If you have class with me, you'll have some opportunity to look further into the two authors that I'll mention. But for today and for this video, we'll just talk a little bit about who they are and an example of what they wrote. So with that, we'll get started. All right, so there's two things I want to highlight when looking at writing and how writing was changing, getting into the Renaissance. The first part, I want to take a look at subject matter. And so as I've been doing in these videos, doing a little compare and contrast, what it was like before, what it was transitioning to. In the pre-Renaissance, what you would get in stories with subject matter, not surprisingly, a lot of religious subject matter would be the focus of written materials. But then in addition to that, themes that might be common or normal or expected would be adventure stories. And then within those, a lot of what they were looking towards that were a part of those adventures were things like the future and what was to come. Something else that was also a strong part of that was whatever was going on with the story. There was very little emphasis given to individuals within the story. Think back to when we talked in the third video about portraits and how that was a Renaissance thing, and that you just didn't see emphasis on individuals when it came to things like paintings, because the body was seen as an impediment to being able to get into heaven. You kind of see that play out in subject matter with pre-Renaissance writing. Not much emphasis on individuals. You wouldn't really get to know characters in the story. You wouldn't get to know what people in the story were necessarily thinking or feeling. You just didn't get that. Now, when you shift to the Renaissance, what you end up getting is an emphasis on the here and the now, an emphasis on what's going on in the present. And another big thing that you get with subject matter in the Renaissance, in addition to just focusing on the present, is you get a real strong look at people and individuals. A lot of emphasis begins to be put on what people are thinking, how people are feeling. You really get to know the characters. If you're somebody who enjoys reading today, if you think about stories that you might like, there's probably a pretty good chance that something you might like about those stories is the development of characters and then really beginning to identify with characters. I mean, I can remember when I read the Hunger Games series, really getting into the Katniss, the character of Katniss, and like almost feeling like I was her, and that just whatever she experienced, I experienced, and that can be a really powerful thing with writing, and you begin to see that kind of thing develop in writing with the Renaissance. So if you're somebody who's into reading today, chances are a lot of what you like about what you read would be a newer thing that really got started with the Renaissance, and something that just wasn't present before. Now, the other big thing to touch on would be what I've called writing style. And I've got them side by side up here, the pre-Renaissance and then the Renaissance. On the left-hand side, I've got the phrase carpe diem, which when translated means seize the day. Carpe diem is Latin. If you looked at written materials in the pre-Renaissance time, didn't really matter where you were. If it was written down, it was probably going to be written down in Latin. Again, we're focusing on Europe. This is the European Renaissance. But wherever you were in Europe, it didn't really make any difference. If it was written down, it was going to be written down in Latin, even if hardly anybody was able to read that. Something else that you would have seen with the writing is there just weren't a lot of books for anybody to read. There weren't a lot of written materials, period, for people to read. Now you shift into the Renaissance years, and if you look at the picture up there, I've got the English translation of Carpe Diem, seize the day, because English is the primary language that we use where I am and with the people that I'm around. and that speaks to a term that's important to know with writing and the changes at this time, and that term being vernacular. The term vernacular just means the everyday language that people use. So if English is the common language where you might be, then that's what you would expect written materials to be in. That's how you would expect people to speak. If it happens to be Spanish, if it happens to be Chinese, if it happens to be Russian, whatever it is, you would expect written materials to be in that language that people understood. You get to the Renaissance years, that starts to happen. And of course, that starts to really begin to open the door for more people to at least have a chance to be able to understand and read written materials. Now, something else that will be addressed in the final video in this series is the printing press. And so when we get to that video, I'll talk a little more about the impact of the printing press on the opportunity for people to read and have those written materials. But again, a big shift was just having written materials in the language that people actually spoke and understood. That was seems like an obvious one, but it was a big shift. Now, the last couple things to address here with writing, just want to speak to a couple of authors from this era. And again, if you have me as your instructor, there's going to be a few things that we'll read from these authors, so you have a chance to see what they were about through their writing. The first one I wanted to mention is a person named Giovanni Boccaccio, notable for having written a book called The Decameron. One thing to note about the title, as well as the timing, is Deca means 10. And when you look at the book, The Decameron, 10 is prominent. Basically, what The Decameron amounts to as a story is it's written in the time of the Black Death or the Black Plague period in Europe. There's lots of death and dying. It's a miserable time. And so the way the story is written is you have a group of 10 friends. So again, think Deca. You have 10 friends who decide to get away to the countryside for 10 days. And they're going to take turns, each telling a story each day. So 10 stories a day over 10 days. And then that's basically what the book consists of. It actually is 100 short stories that are these stories told by these friends over the course of what amounts to their vacation. And some of the things you can see in it that are really characteristic of Renaissance writing, and this would be the early phase of Renaissance writing, is when you read these stories, you really see how you get to know who the characters are. You get to see actual dialogue between characters. You get insights into what they're thinking, how they're feeling, much like you would expect out of a lot of the types of books you might read today with characters and the development of characters. And so that's something that is influenced by the Renaissance period, because it just wouldn't have seen that kind of character development in any kind of books that were written before. Also, because this was right around the time of the Black Death when this was written, this was really a present story. It wasn't about a future event or anything like that. It was really written based on circumstances that people were familiar with at the time. So again, if you have me as an instructor, one of the things we're going to be doing is taking a look at one of the stories. I hope you enjoy it. Now, the other author I wanted to mention is a person named Niccolo Machiavelli. He was also a Renaissance writer. He was later than Boccaccio, and most noted for a book he wrote called The Prince in 1517. And The Prince, even though it was written over 500 years ago, is really still a book that I think a lot of people look to, at least in part, especially people who are in leadership or aspire to leadership roles. There are lots of different things that people might read to try to learn how to be a better leader. This is a book that people still look to today. So basically what it is it's a guidebook for leadership is what it amounts to. Now, when you're looking at it and reading through it now, the language may not always resonate with how we think about things today. But if you kind of account for some of the terminology and kind of translate it into the kind of words we might use today to describe people in leadership roles and how people interact with each other, I think you can see a lot of things that can translate or transfer over pretty well to our time. And overall, if there's kind of a theme to it, is essentially what he said is to be a good leader, you basically you need to do what you need to do, and that there's not necessarily a one size fits all approach to being a good leader. And so a way to kind of speak to that maybe a little more specifically is, basically through the book, you'll find that he says, there are times as a leader you need to be truthful and honest. There's a time when you need to be deceitful and need to lie. There's a time when you need to be nice. There's a time when you need to be mean. And that the best leaders are the ones that are able to recognize how they need to respond to something in the moment and to do so correctly, consistently. Because it's not like you're just always nice, or you're always not nice, or you're always honest, or you're always deceitful. That's not going to get it done. You've got to be what you need to be when you need to be it, and be able to identify that at the time. So anyway, so that's a couple of examples of some Renaissance writers that we'll be taking a closer look at with my class, and then just some characteristics with Renaissance writing. And so this is the end of our fourth video of 5. So the final installment will be a focus on the printing press. Thanks.